Welcome to Book Talk English. Chapter 11. The path to the rock of the falling flowers was steep, and Tria leaned forward, sometimes on all fours as he climbed. Just before he reached the top, he stopped by the side of the path and took the jjigae off his back. He drank from the gourd and poured a little water on his hands to splash on his sweaty face. Thus refreshed, he felt ready to give his full attention to the side of the rock. He walked the last incline, holding the jjigae upwardly in front of him, and set it down once he reached the broad plateau at the top. It was as if he stood alone on the top of the world. He gazed around this way and that, hardly knowing where to look first. Before him to the north, the creek fell away sharply to the river, a broad stroke of silver, rebounding its way through the hills and plains. Behind him was the path he had climbed, with the city of Bia below. How small it looked now! Three-Ear shaded his eyes from the sun as it began to set, wondering if the smudge on the horizon might be the sea. Surely the creek was high enough to see all the way there. Grimace's words came to life. The king standing where Three-Ear stood now, surrounded by the palace women. The enemy scrambling up the path he had just followed. The cries of the women, their terror and their sudden act of bravery, their colored dresses like the petals of thousands of flowers. You know the story, huh? The voice at his side started to Three-Ear. He felt his heart leap and run. He had not heard the man come up the path, but there he stood, poorly dressed and oddly pale, as if he had been ill for a long time, or never ran outdoors when the sun shone. Three-Ear cleared his throat. "Greetings, sir. Have you eaten well today?" "Not today. Not for a few days now," came the impolite answer. The man smiled, but Three-Ear did not like his smile. There was something unpleasant behind it. Although he would have preferred to stay at the rock a while longer, he decided to descend rather than remain in unwanted company. Three-Ear turned and picked up his jjigae, preparing to hoist it to his back. "Let me help you with that," the man said, moving forward. A fine load of rice indeed. Three-Ear stepped back, trying to quell his alarm. His cargo was far more precious than rice. "Your offer is kind, good sir, but I have no need of help." The man's smile turned into a leer. "Now, there's a rude boy. My help is no good to you," and reached out with one arm to grab the jjigae. Three-Ear jerked it away from him. He stumbled, coming dangerously near the edge of the cliff. The man snarled, menacing and ugly, and advanced a few steps. He seized the side of the store container with both hands and pulled. In the last moment, everything had come together in Three-Ear's mind. The man's patter, his rudeness, his coming upon Three-Ear in such a deserted place. He was one of the dreaded Dodong, the bandits who hid throughout the countryside and on the outskirts of the cities, emerging only to rob weary travelers. Three-Ear held on to the frame of jjigae with all his might. The rover pulled and jerked. Grimace's solid stroke worked out. At one point the man released one hand, cursing. The straw had cut into his palm. Three-Ear's hands were toughened by carrots from axe and spade, his arms strengthened by endless work. He gave not a single step of ground to the robber. "Be careful!" A scream of warning sounded in Three-Ear's head. "You're pulling so hard. If you let go suddenly, you will fall. Move. Move now, so your back is not to the cliff edge." Three-Ear shifted his feet and began edging sideways. Still the robber pulled, now shouting curses and threats with every breath. Soon Three-Ear's back was to the path. His hands and arms felt like iron. They would never break. He would never let go. The robber was weakening. He could feel it. Treer stared into the robber's face. Hatred would give him more strength. And it did too. Silently, he swore to himself that his doggone man would never win the jiggy with his priceless contents. The man stared back at him. His face contorted in an evil grimace. But suddenly he laughed and released the container. Treer collapsed backwards into the arms of another man who had stolen up the path behind him, a second robber. Against two, Treer could do nothing. The second man pinned his arms back while the first strode forward and wrenched the jiggy away. Treer kicked and struggled. His head crashed into the chin of his captor, who swore in pain. The other robber reached out and slapped Treer's face viciously. "Stop your struggle, worthless one," he said. "We mean only to rob you, but it would not be past us to harm you if you prove too much trouble." While his companion kept Treer pinioned, the first robber quickly opened the straw container. He threw aside the packing with straw and silk, growing angrier with each handful. "Not rice. What is it you are carrying, idiot boy?" At last, he drew out the first of the vases, and his face grew purple with fury. "Useless!" he screamed, gripping the mouth of the vase with one hand and waving about. Treer caught his breath with fear. "We might set it," said the second robber more calmly. "Have you no eyes in your head?" His companion shouted back. "Look at it. Can't you see this could only be a gift for the palace? Nobody would dare buy it from us." "Keep looking. Perhaps there is something more." The robber set the first vase down on the ground and returned to his search of the container. With more muttered curses, he pulled out the second vessel and threw a final handful of straw on the ground. "Nothing!" he screamed. "All the way up this hill, and nothing!" His companion had shifted his grip and now had one arm across Treer's throat. Throttling him so he could barely breathe. With his other hand he pulled roughly at Treer's waist pouch. Here is something to cheer you up." He had the pouch in his free hand and emptied the contents onto the ground. The flintstone and the little crate total fell out, followed by the string of the coins. "Something, anyway," grumbled the first robber, scooping up the coins. He kicked the jiggy out of his way and headed down the path. "Come, we've wasted enough time here." Treer breathed a silent prayer of thanks. "Take the money. Take anything. Just leave the vases alone." The second robber laughed. "Wait," he said. "Come hold this donkey for a moment." The first robber retraced his step. "What is it?" he asked impatiently, grabbing Treer by the arms from behind. "A little fun, as long as we are up here." The robber picked up one of the vases. He stepped to the edge of the cliff and flung it into the air. Peering over the edge, he put his hand to his ear in a pose of listening. After an agony of silence, the crash of pottery was heard on the rocks far below. The second robber laughed again. "One more," he said in a jovial voice. "No!" Treer screamed, an inhuman screech of utter desperation. The robber, heard him, lifted him off his feet and slammed him to the ground so hard that his breath left him. And Treer could only watch it as the second vase sailed through the air. With a yelp like a wounded dog, he put his hands over his ears so he would not hear the crash. Treer rolled onto his side and vomited. He retched again and again, until his stomach felt as empty as a spirit. Shakily, he rose to his feet and bent over double, his hands on his knees. Failure, the most dishonorable failure. He had been unable to keep the vases safe, but he was not even halfway to Songdo. If he had reached his destination, and the work had been rejected by the court, at least he would have done his part. He raised his head slowly and stared at the edge of the cliff. The thought of returning to Min with this news, and his whole body shuddered. Nothing could be worse. He straightened up and took a few steps toward the edge. What would it be like to live up and sail through the air as those women had? Like flying, like a bird, so free. And time would feel different. Those few moments would be like hours, surely. But just then, he heard Crayman's voice so clearly that he turned in surprise. Leaping into death is not the only way to show true courage. No one was there, of course. Trier stepped back from the edge, ashamed. He knew it was true. It would take far more courage to face Min. He thought of his promise to Ajma, and besides, Crayman was waiting for him. It was his duty to return. He picked up his waist pouch and put the flintstones and the tote bag inside. Then he untied a few items from the jjigae. There was one pair of sandals. He had done the other spare pair the day before. The food bag still held a few rice cakes, but Trier felt that he would never be able to eat again. He tucked the pouch bag under his tunic and slung the sandals, the food bag and the drinking gourd over one shoulder. Then he stood for a few moments staring at nothing. Gradually, the empty straw container came into focus before him. With a sudden cry of fury, Trier picked up the jjigae and threw it, container and over the edge of the cliff. He watched its descent. It did not fall cleanly to the water, but bounced several times off the rocks on its way down. Trier turned and began to run. He ran blindly down the mountain path, heedless of the rocks and shrub. Several times he fell, but was on his feet again in the next breath, stumbling, tripping, skidding, in a headlong descent. When at last he reached the point where the path leveled out, he fell hard onto his face, the dirt mixing with his tears. His teeth cut into his top lip, and he spat blood. The pain was welcome. He deserved far worse. Trier sat up and wiped his face with the edge of his tunic, hearing nothing but the sound of his own panting and the rushing river nearby. Suddenly, a last flicker of hope flared within him. The second vase, he had not heard the crash. Perhaps it had fallen into the water. Perhaps it was still unbroken. Trier made his way around the base of the cliff to the river. Boulders blocked the way to a narrow strip of the sand with more rocks beyond. He looked up the sheer face of the cliff as it rose far above him and tried to guess where the vase might have fallen. Then he began scrambling over the boulders. Thorny shrubs grew among the rocks. Sometimes they messed into a wall so thick that he had to scramble down to the water's edge and wait to make further progress. If the vases had fallen among those shrubs, he would never be able to find them. The small mass on the sand up ahead, not as dark as the rocks. Could that be a vase? Trier made his awkward way over the stony ground, barking his shin once, but hardly feeling the pain in his eagerness. No, a pile of pebbles. For a long time, he made his way back and forth between the cliff and the river, up and down over the rocks and sand. He had nearly given up hope when he came upon a little mound of shards. They would never have been noticed by a casual passerby. So thoroughly smashed was the vessel that the fragments were no bigger than pebbles. Trier crouched and touched them gingerly. The first vase he hopped with all his might. He stood and looked around. The thief had thrown both vases from the same spot on the cliff. The other one should be somewhere nearby. At the river's edge, Trier saw something on the sand. He approached it slowly, telling himself it was probably not a pile of pebbles or a piece of driftwood. It was a second vase. The first of his fall had driven it into the sand, in 100 pieces. Trier dropped to his knees. Fool, he thought bitterly. Fool, to how that it could have survived such a fall. The second vase, its fur cushioned however slightly by the sand, had broken into bigger pieces. The largest shard was the size of his palm. Trier picked up this piece and swished it through the water to rinse off the sand. Across one side of the shard went a shallow groove, evidence of the vase's melon shape. Part of an inlaid peony blossom with its stem and leaves twined along the groove, and the glaze still shone clear and pure, untouched by the violence that had just been done it. A sharp edge of the shard bit into Trier's palm. The pain was an echo. He remembered now. It was when he had thrown the shard from the first batch of the ruined vases into the river in Drupo. How long ago it seemed! Suddenly, Trier raised his head. He stood up and squared his shoulders, still clutching the piece of pottery. He laid the shard carefully on a flat stone. He took the clay turtle from his waist pouch and squeezed it back into a ball. Next, he rolled the clay between his palm until it formed a long snake. Picking up the shard again, he pinched the snake all the way round the sharp edge to protect it. Trier removed the flint stone from his waist pouch. They must scratch the shard. He tied them into one corner of his tunic, then put the clay-bound shard into the pouch. Holding the pouch clear of the borders with one hand, he climbed back to the path. His every movement was quick with purpose. To hesitate was too tough. He had made up his mind. He would journey on to Songdo and show the emissary the single shard.